Welcome everybody on YouTube. It's Clear Vision Wednesday time. I'm Claudia Mühlenweg. I'm your host, and I'm a natural vision improvement teacher and the founder of the Naturally Clear Vision Method. And today we have a topic that I get a lot of questions about. It's sunlight, right? Can I go outside in the sun? Is it okay? Is it safe? Is it dangerous? And I have a super special guest with me today, and I'm going to bring her on the stage. Let me just highlight her video. Esther Joy van der Werf. Welcome to the show, Esther.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I'm excited to be on your show. It's the first time, and I've heard quite a bit about your show, so it's nice to be in the crowd.
Yeah, and you've been one of my biggest inspirations because I think you trained like 22, 25 years ago to be a bit like way before me, and you've always been an inspiration, and your website is just incredibly, like, you have so many resources on that website. So first of all, our topic is sunlight, and you've done a lot of research on that, and that's what I'm excited about, learning even more about sunlight and how we can use it or not use it when it comes to vision improvement. So tell us a little bit, because I don't like reading bios. I always feel that's really boring. Tell us a little bit how you got into vision improvement, and maybe why sunlight is also such an important thing for you.
My first exposure to vision improvement as even a possibility, because I never knew it was a thing, was an article I read in the Daily Mail, in a British newspaper. That was, I think it was Mansfield, Peter Mansfield. He had published a book, and there was an article in the Daily Mail about his book, and it talked about you could improve your vision. And I'm like, I was nearsighted at the time. I wasn't wearing glasses because I hated them. I tried glasses and just couldn't stand it. This feeling of this barrier between me and the rest of the world annoyed the heck out of me. So I'd rather be in my blurry world than in the crisp world with the glasses. And so I was managing, I was kind of squinting and all sorts of things. And I thought that would be the rest of my life. I'd just not see as well, and I'd have to squint at everything. And if I squinted, I could manage to get it clear, but it was a lot of effort. So this article came out, and I'm like, oh, really? It's possible? And I bought the book, and I think I totally misunderstood it. Or the book just wasn't that well written. I don't remember what the problem was, but I totally did the wrong thing. I thought it was all about eye exercises, that you had to move your eyes up and down, left and right, diagonals and circles and near to far, and, practice with a string on tied to your doorknob and following the string, all that sort of eye exercise stuff. And I tried it for a few weeks, and then I got so bored with it, and I hadn't seen any results. So I had no reason to continue, and I gave up on it. And I thought the Bates method, because the book was about the Bates method, I thought the Bates method didn't work. That was just my conclusion at that time. Years later, another 6 or so years later, I was in San Francisco and came across Tom Quackenbush and his book, Relearning to See. And of course, seeing this book and the author, the author was right there. So I just asked him, because I didn't believe in it anymore. I says, does this really work? I just bluntly asked. And poor Tom, he's like, well, you either read my book or you come to my class and you'll find out. And the book is like a huge encyclopedia-sized book. It's terribly big, and so I hesitated. Plus, it was expensive. It was $35 at that time, and I'd never bought a book that was $35 before. I thought that was insane, so I left it. But luckily, it was a 2-day expo, and I thought about it overnight, and I thought, well, if that book can at least stop me from getting worse, it'll be worth the $35. So I invested in the book, didn't read it for months. Typical. I finally read it. By that time I was in Costa Rica. And in the 2 weeks it took me to read it, I got back to 20/20 vision. And that was a huge surprise. I really didn't expect it would improve my vision. I was just hoping I wouldn't get any worse from where I was. But here I was suddenly seeing 20/20 and hugely surprised by that. And I had a boyfriend at the time who was much more nearsighted than me, used glasses all day long, about -4, some astigmatism. And here I go going, well, I found something that'll work. And take off your glasses. And he was like, hang on. Understandably, he was very hesitant to not use his glasses. But I talked him into just taking them off for 1 week. And then we would go through the book together and practice all the things that Tom Quackenbush wrote about. So he did that. He was okay with that. And I said, okay, I'll do all the driving this week. You don't have to worry about it. And so he was okay with that. Now, at the beginning, I put him in front of the eye chart. The book came with an eye chart. I put him in front of it. I measured out the 20 feet distance because that was the only thing I knew how to do. And I put this poor guy for -4.5 or so, 20 foot away from the chart. And I asked him what he can read. And he's like peering at this thing on the wall. And eventually he says, did you put something on the wall? He couldn't make out the chart at all. So luckily ignorance is bliss, right? I didn't have a clue that that was the wrong approach right there. But I also didn't have a clue that it might take a long time for him to improve. And we just very positively went into that week and kept working with the methods. We both were good at staring, so we needed to learn to blink. And there was a lot of stuff that we could work on. And then after the week was over, he didn't ask for his glasses back. So I just continued. I didn't tell him where I had hidden the glasses, so he couldn't cheat. And we kept going. And it was about a month later when I finally had this, oh, I should check with the chart again. So same chart, same distance. He could read to the 50 line, 20/50 vision, just about, which is only 1 line away from passing the driver's test. And that was just such an enormous surprise that he could suddenly, pretty much be safe on the road without glasses when he couldn't even see the chart a month earlier. So I wrote a thank you letter to Tom Quackenbush that time. It was just an email. I sent it off to him, didn't think about it. And then Tom emailed back saying, oh, he actually called. He called back and said, I have a teacher training program coming up in July. And this was the year 2000. And would you like to attend? And I'm like, well, I could. And I ended up taking that teacher training course, and the rest is history, as they say. I've been teaching ever since.
So what do you think? I mean, now that our topic is sunlight, and you mentioned Costa Rica, and you're reading a book, and I would be like, well, if I'm nearsighted and reading a book, how's that going to improve my distance vision, right? So, so what do you think were the biggest contributors, or what else would you think is important for people to know about? Because that's a pretty quick success, right?
Yes.
That's really great that you accomplished this so fast, and even your boyfriend was -4. That's a really fast improvement.
Yeah, we both did really well. Perhaps being in Costa Rica was an advantage. Lots of sunshine. Plus, neither one of us was working at the time. We were both kind of in semi-retirement, living the good life. That helped. But mainly the understanding from the book that any effort you make to improve your vision doesn't actually help. That was completely opposite to what I thought. And so taking the effort out of it, avoiding the staring, we really had to remind each other. He would wave in front of my eyes going, hello, you're staring again. And I'd go, hey, you're staring again. We'd have to remind each other a lot, because that was, for both of us, a really bad habit. And so learning to blink and learning to not make an effort to see was huge. A big difference to how we used our eyes all those years before.
Well, that's so fair. And taking the glasses off, and that's so true. Like, everybody thinks it's eye exercises when it couldn't be more from the opposite. But let's switch to the topic of sunlight, because that's our topic today. And I think you brought some slides with you. So should we do those first, or what do you feel?
It might be useful to just go through the slides first and give a bit of a background and an understanding to the viewers, so you know where I'm coming from. And then we can open it up to questions and go from there.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm going to hide my video so that we can see you full screen with your slides. So
okay, so I'm going to go.
You should be able to go. If not, let me make sure that you can share your slides.
Yeah, it says host disabled screen sharing.
Yeah, I will make you co-host, and then you can You should be able to share your slides now.
Yes, I can. Okay.
Awesome. And yeah, when you watch us, we do blink a lot. And I used to be great at staring as well.
So while you're watching this, just allow your eyes to be very happy and relaxed. And can you see my mouse?
Yeah,
Guessing
we
you
can
can.
see. Can you put it into play mode so that we see only the big slide?
Slideshow, I think that's this one, huh?
I don't know how. I only use Keynote on the Mac, so I don't know how other apps work, but it would be nicer to see it full screen.
Here we go. So now I lose you. I don't see you anymore.
That's okay, but we still don't have you full screen. We still see the other thumbnails on the side.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Ooh,
There must
ooh.
be something like play. It's okay, otherwise we just continue as this.
Let me
like,
just go out of the screen very quickly, and then it should probably stop the share, and then I'll go back in after I get the screen big. Slideshow. There we go.
So we have a lot of people watching live, which is awesome. And I'm gonna look for any questions, but let's do the slides first. Yeah, there's already a lot of great questions. But let's go to the slides first.
Yeah, I don't seem to be able to go full screen without
It says
you
fifth button over on the bottom. Okay, I don't know. I'm
Where?
just fifth
Sorry.
button over on the bottom. It's okay. We can just do
So
it like
on
this.
on the PowerPoint, if you just go over to the fifth button over, so there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the bottom right
On
of the
bottom.
PowerPoint. There's a little desk on the bottom right. Keep going, keep going, keep going to the right. Keep going, keep going.
1, 2,
keep
3.
going.
This
3,
one?
4. That one, yeah. Click that one. That should take you to full screen. It should. It's a little hard to
Mhm.
tell. It's a little small here, but that should do it. That should be your play.
Have you got it now? I have it.
Yeah, we still see the next slide, but let's just keep going because this is great information. So
Okay,
we can see the speaker notes now, so that's probably not helpful. We didn't test this part beforehand, so
I'm sorry.
it's all right. Let's
But-
just go through the slides and
So we'll go through. So we'll begin here because I love this quote. Bill Mollison, the father of permaculture, he wrote several books on permaculture. He says, though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And I kind of agree with that. We have some very simple solutions that we tend to not notice and get overlooked and get played down very often because we think it ought to be complex. And I don't think so. And sunlight is kind of the same thing, that it's not a very complex topic once you get to the bottom of it. So let's keep this in mind. Let's allow things to be simple and easy. So let's start with explaining the spectrum of sunlight. So here's the whole spectrum, the solar spectrum, with that tiny band of color. That's what we see. That's the visible spectrum. So hang on. Down here, this is the this little band here. That's all we see. But there's this huge, wide range of radiation coming down to Earth that most of it we just don't see. It's only this tiny band we see, and that's really what we break that up into the colors that we see. Now, to the right of that is IR, means infrared. So that's part of our spectrum, microwaves, radio waves, and long radio waves, TVs. That's all in this right side. And then on the left here is the UV. And UV stands for ultraviolet. And then the X-rays and gamma rays. Okay, so there's a wide range of frequencies coming down at us, but only a small part that we see. And most people think of that as sunlight. So here's another graph of the more or less the same thing, but it kind of shows how much of everything comes in. So the visual part we get a lot of. The infrared a little bit less. So you see that going down here, right? So this is a peak in blue that we see the most of. And then we get a little bit less of red, and then it goes down into all these others. And the same on the other side, the UV drops off pretty quickly. And so we have much more visible light that comes through than the other rays that we don't see, but they are there. So just so you know. And there's a different shaded here. The outside atmosphere gets even more, but our Earth's atmosphere filters some of it out for us. So we get this this darker range that you see here. So let me go to the next slide. Here is that spectrum again, and now we're focusing a little bit more on the UV. UV, the ultraviolet light, is split up in 4 sections. UVA, which we get most of, and then there's a little bit of the UVB, and then UVC is such a small trace amount that it's basically ignored, neglected, because it's such a small amount. And apparently the vacuum UV, I hadn't even heard of that before. It's like, we don't get it apparently, or in such small amounts that it's not of importance. Now, UVB is the important part of ultraviolet. That's the part that we need for producing vitamin D in the body. Because low rates of vitamin D are related to all kinds of health problems. So there's a list here: cancer, arthritis, diabetes, sleep disorders, multiple sclerosis, and more. There's a list of like at least a dozen health issues that become problematic if you're low on vitamin D. Okay, now as far as the eyes go, you also use vitamin D or UVB to get your pupil to narrow down to a very small diameter. And that's important in our eyes, right? So a larger pupil will let in more light, which leads to greater light sensitivity. So when the light is bright, you want your pupil to narrow down to something small, so you're not sensitive to that light. You're comfortable in it. Now, if you're wearing a UV blocking lens, then the pupil doesn't constrict as much as it would under direct sunlight. So here is the first problem we come across: people that say, well, I'm sensitive to sunlight, I only go out with sunglasses on. Now their pupil is going to stay larger, right? And the darker the glasses, the larger the pupil. And you're actually feeding into the problem that way. And it isn't just sunglasses either. Regular glasses without photochrom lenses in them, any kind of glass blocks UV. So it might let through some UVA, but it doesn't let through UVB. And there comes your problem. If the UVB doesn't come in, the pupil will react less to the light. Okay, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I just knew that UV light was responsible and the brightness of the light for pupil constriction, but I didn't know it was just the UVB light. That's interesting.
Yeah. So then John Ott is he's passed away quite a few years ago. He was a researcher. He was actually a time-lapse photographer. That was his hobby. And Walt Disney asked him to do a little time-lapse movie of a pumpkin growing from planting the seed to the little sprout coming out, and then finally the plant growing, the flower, and then the pumpkin developing. And so Walt Disney asked John Ott to make a movie about that. And John Ott tried that, but the pumpkin wouldn't grow. He had it down in his cellar, and he had overhead lights, what do you call it, the fluorescent lights he had overhead. And the plant would grow, but the pumpkin itself kind of became a tiny little pumpkin, and then it withered away and died. And he couldn't understand why. And so he told Walt Disney, I'm sorry, it didn't work out. I'm going to have to repeat this experiment next season. So during the winter, the overhead fluorescent lights burned out, and he replaced them, but the lights that he was using weren't available in the hardware store, and he just put in a different set of fluorescent lights. Instead of the cool white, he went to the I think the warm spectrum of the fluorescent lights. And that means the spectrum that comes down onto those plants is actually slightly different than it was before. And the interesting part was that season, the pumpkin developed, but the flower wouldn't. And so the movie was still useless to him. And he apologized again to Disney. And then he was like, well, what the heck could have caused this? He says the only thing that changed was the overhead lights. So you got some more of the other overhead lights that he used the first year, put them side by side with the new ones. And then the next season, he was finally able to make the movie because the pumpkin grew, the flower grew, and everything was well. And Walt Disney got his movie. Now, all that led to him researching why the pumpkin wouldn't grow under one light and the flower wouldn't grow under the other light. And he spent a huge amount of time checking how plants grow and what lights and different colors of light, what the effect on growth of plants is when you change the colors that they grow under. And it was an interesting journey, gave him a lot of information about how cells work, how cells in plants react to different parts of the spectrum of light. Some react to red, some react to blue, some react to green, some react to UV. And so only if you have all of the spectrum does all of the plant appear healthy. Okay, so that was his conclusion. And he went in and used it with animals too, and tested his theories on mice. And he put mice in different cabins with different colors of lights. And one under a pink filter, one under a blue filter, and I forget, there was another one. And then the final, there's 4 different boxes. The final box was mice under regular sunlight. They all got the same air, they got the same food. There was nothing different except the light that they were under. Now, the mice under the pink developed necrosis of their tails within a few months. First, they got all these spots on the tails, and it got worse, and then the tail fell off because they were only under this pink light. Now, if we moved those mice from the pink light to the full spectrum sunlight, then if they only still had the tail spots, then they would heal up and they'd be fine. Of course, once the tail had fallen off, you couldn't do much for those poor animals. The ones under the blue light became very aggressive. And again, once you put them under the sunlight, the aggressiveness went away and they became docile mice again. But so each color of filter had different health problems associated with it. And his conclusion was that, well, that's kind of strange because within the spectrum of light, that pink light that those first mice got is in the spectrum of full spectrum from the sun. That same pink light is in there. So you can't say the pink light is the problem. He concluded that the lack of the rest of the spectrum was the problem. So that's a really important part that I never understood until I read John Ott's research. It isn't like these days we're all afraid of the too much blue in LED lights. Well, the blue isn't an issue either. It's the lack of the rest of the spectrum that creates the health issue. So there is the key that we all need, that we don't find in our normal newspapers, right? Nobody tells us this. So he called that problem malillumination, which is similar to malnutrition. If you don't get all your nutrients, then no matter how much vitamin C you take, if you don't get vitamin B, then you'll still have a health problem. Is it that you had an overdose of vitamin C? No, you're lacking vitamin B, for example, right? So it's the same with malillumination. You can have too much of a blue light, but the problem is really created by the lack of the red side of the spectrum. Okay, so that's what he calls malillumination. And malillumination occurs when you're not spending enough time outdoors. So people that spend all day indoors, and especially office workers that, they get to work, especially in wintertime, they get to work before the sun even comes up. They spend all day in the office, they go home and the sun is already down. If you're in a northern latitude and it's winter, then that's a typical thing. So they don't get enough outdoor time, but lots of time indoors under artificial light. When you're outside and you're always wearing glasses, you might get enough outside time, but if you do that always wearing glasses, you're still creating malillumination. Obviously, sunglasses or any colored glass contributes to that. And we see that more and more these days. People afraid of the blue light wear these yellow glasses, and then they wear them not just when they're looking at a computer screen, they go outside and still have those yellow glasses on. And they're creating their own problems there. UV blocking contact lenses, and most of them are, unfortunately, have the same problem. Using sunscreen, because of this huge fear of sunlight that goes around, we're all being told, oh, you must slap on the sunscreen and protect yourself all the time. Don't get any sun on your skin. Don't burn. The don't burn part is definitely good advice, but the sunscreen is blocking some of that UV, and you're not making vitamin D in your body. So you're creating a problem. Being totally covered up with clothing when outside is also a problem. Like some countries where their religion tells them that they have to be completely covered and only the eyes are exposed. You're creating issues, you're creating health issues. And lastly, this is an important one too, if you never get sunlight between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., 2 hours each side of solar noon, then you're lacking vitamin D, you're lacking UVB exposure, because that's highest between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. In
And
summer, you
that's
can.
the time that's the time they always tell us, don't go in the sun at all, right? Between 10
Yes,
a.m. It's like,
yes.
but I remember, like, don't stay out of the sun between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And of course, I just want to, interject. Of course, you need to make sure that you don't get burned and that you do protection. But yeah, I love that you talked about the skin too. It's not just the eyes, that we need to get some natural light on without any blocks of sunscreen or clothing.
We do, because otherwise we don't produce vitamin D and create all kinds of health issues. So this advice that we've been given to stay out of the sun between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., or in summer in most countries that switch an hour, then it's 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you don't go out in those hours and don't expose at least some skin for a little while, not long enough to burn, but at least, you need about 15 minutes or so of UVB exposure to create enough vitamin D in the body to help you through and be healthy. So that's a super important part. Whoops, sorry, back one. And here's a visual image of that. On the left, you'll see regular daylight. This is when the sun shines. That's the spectrum that comes through that we see, with a slight peak in the blue. And then at sunset, it changes. The blues drop way out of it, but we're high in the reds. Okay. Now, interesting thing is, if you look at the spectrum of an incandescent lamp, it looks very much like this sunset lamp. It's high in the reds, lows in the blues, but a nice straight line. Now, if you look at more modern lights here on the right, this one is the fluorescent light. You see that peak in the blue that's here, but very low in between there and extremely low in the yellows and reds, right? So like I say, the blue is not actually a problem, because that's here too, right? This has that same blue in the daylight. And so you can see that red line here. Sorry, it's a little hard to get my mouse to do what I want to do. So this sunlight line is normal to us. That's healthy spectrum, right? That's what we are developed for. That's what we need. So we're getting enough of the blue here, but not enough at all of the reds and yellows, and even the greens are low, right? Now, the new OLED lights are a little different. They have more of the greens and yellows, but they're still very low in red. And they still have a fairly big dip here in between the darker blue and the lighter blues, right? So this is where you create the malillumination. All that white area above it is our malillumination area, right? This is what we're lacking, and that creates health issues. And so there was a research that came out, this one's from 2011, about indoor workers, how an epidemic of skin melanoma, and melanoma are the worst skin cancers apparently, that are the most damaging, the most deaths occur from melanoma. And they found that indoor workers have an epidemic of this. Their numbers are rising incredibly year by year. The numbers are going up of how many indoor workers have these skin melanoma. So these researchers then came to a conclusion that one factor involves that with indoor exposure, you get UVA passing through windows, but you don't get UVB exposure. So the vitamin D that you get from UVB exposure actually gets damaged by only getting UVE because you're behind windows. So that's an interesting part. And another factor involves the low levels of the vitamin D3, that because of not having enough time outdoors are only getting UVA through windows. So the vitamin D is then involved with the melanoma cells. This is all, researcher language, don't worry about it, but the basics is that increased UVA exposure and inadequate vitamin D3, which is the UVB exposure, promotes the melanoma. So the outdoor workers did not have this huge rise in cases. It was only the indoor workers, and therefore that suggests that chronic sunlight exposure, chronic is a bit of a funny word here, it sounds negative, but enough sunlight exposure has a protective effect against
Wow.
melanoma.
Wow, right? This is the
Yes,
exact opposite of what we've been told.
exactly. So, and then going back to eyesight, there is a guy named John J. Harding. He's done a couple of studies. One is called Testing Time for the Sunlight Hypothesis of Cataracts and the Untenability of the Sunlight Hypothesis of Cataractogenesis. So what he found is cataracts are less common at higher latitudes where UV light is stronger. In the Himalayas, right? There's less cataracts, more UV light. And then he too comes to the conclusion that sunlight appears to be a protective factor rather than causing cataracts. What are we hearing from doctors all the time? Eye doctors? Oh, if you have a cataract, you must stay out of the sun. You must wear the wraparound sunglasses. Don't get any exposure to UV because it'll get worse. But the research proves the opposite. And that's interesting. And we should know about that, right? Another study, this is also a very interesting study, is from 2016, a little more recent, Hull, Berwick et al. Their study basically goes through a more in-depth look at research done before and said these people are not really paying attention to the fact that not enough sun exposure has become a major public health problem. And they're saying, because of the vitamin D production is their real, their angle on it. They say, look, we're not producing enough vitamin D in the body, and therefore we're creating all these health issues, and we must immediately change the current sun avoidance health advice that's being given out. And this is from 2016. Have we seen a change in the advice?
Nope, and especially not from dermatologists or eye doctors, for sure.
Yeah.
They just keep telling you it's dangerous. And
Yeah.
my dermatologist told me, don't live in Southern California if you're from Northern Europe.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so fascinating.
Yeah, so this study is in the links below the video. You can look at it yourself, you can read it yourself. And this line that's copied here is their first line in the first paragraph of their conclusion. So I think it's a powerful conclusion that they come to. Oops. Oh yeah. Babies, can you expose babies' eyes to strong sunlight while sleeping? It's advised not to. What I've recently heard from one of our colleagues is, oh, you must keep babies out of the sunlight for the first 6 months. And I'm going, oh, where does that come from? And so I looked it up. And would you believe the American Association of Pediatricians has that on their website? Keep babies out of sunlight for the first 6 months. It's dangerous to them. Whereas reality is, it's very beneficiary to them, whether they're asleep or awake, to be exposed to sunshine. You should not shade their eyes from the sun either. It's part of how they develop. We need sun for our eyes to develop in a healthy way. So, this
Right,
question.
the studies done with the children, the indoor children and the outdoor children, and how the myopia increases related to, like, I think it was like kids that play 2 or more hours outside have way lower rates of myopia than the kids that spend most of their days inside. Right? So that's
there's quite a few studies about that recently that were done in Australia and China, I think, where they proved, because they wanted to find out, what is the most important factor in causing myopia. So they measured how much time kids were reading. They measured how much time they were indoors. They measured how much time they were outdoors. I think they even checked diet as an influence. And they kind of expected the amount of time reading would be the main factor in creating myopia. And to their surprise, it wasn't. It wasn't a factor at all. The amount of hours outdoors, that was the one big preventative factor. The more time outdoors, the less chance of myopia. And so their recommendation became you should spend at least 2 to 3 hours a day outdoors in order to balance out the negativity from being indoors in darker surroundings. So, oops, sorry. I must have gone to the wrong, and when I switched, I went to the wrong PDF. Let me just get out of the screen sharing here.
I did put all those links into the show notes. So we have a lot of questions. So maybe we should look at some of the questions, or is there
Sure,
anything
yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, let's look on YouTube right now. Let's see, I'm just looking if they're related to sunlight. Have there been many adults in your career who were cured only by palming many times a day? Okay, this is the opposite of sunlight, is palming. But that's a question that somebody has.
So yeah, palming is, it depends. Not everybody likes it. Not everybody has benefit from it. And Bates said that too. It doesn't work for everybody, but when it works really well. So palming, if you can do it in a way that relaxes you, and you know, I've written in one of my books, my longest palming session was 6 hours. And it was so needed. I was in a stressful space and I really needed to get out of it because my vision had been affected by the stresses of my niece dying and her being sick for 8 months before. And it was just, you know, it was so much stress those 8 months that once she had passed away and the funeral was over, I'm like, oh, I need time for myself. I'm going to do a long palming session. I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to go until I feel relaxed. It took 6 hours that day of palming and came out of it super relaxed and super happy, and my eyes cleared right up from 6 hours of palming. So palming is fantastic. You don't have to do it 6 hours. Short sessions, a couple of minutes here and there, can be very beneficial too. You have to just figure out for yourself what is best for me. Do I like the long session? Do I like a shorter session? Do I do multiple sessions? How do I do it? How do I relax best while palming? Because that's going to help your eyes the most.
So there's a lot of questions, but not many about sunlight, which is interesting. But here's one. Geraldine is asking, I've been doing palming and sunning and ended up seeing double vision when I am on my computer. Why do you think this happened? Obviously, we can't give any medical advice, but any thoughts that come up for you that
I never give medical advice because I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like, but we don't know all the backstory. That's what
no,
I'm
and I don't know any of her backstory. But my assumption is she does something with strain. Because you don't create double vision unless you're straining. So there's something that you do that creates strain rather than releases it. So you need to look at how am I palming, how am I sunning, and what is causing this strain.
So any tips, like for somebody, like for instance, like her, let's say there's a strain with the sunlight, and is there any kind of tips that you would give how to slowly ease yourself into palming, sunning if you are really light sensitive? I was extremely light sensitive when I first began.
Yeah, and a lot of people are. And the person that was most light sensitive that I've worked with couldn't even be outside without dark sunglasses, even in the shade. So the first time that I worked with him, I let him keep his dark sunglasses on and led him to a place in the shade under a tree and just talked to him for a little while, help him relax, and then invited him to take the sunglasses off with his eyes closed. And with eyes closed, he was okay with that, right? And that's the first time being outdoors without dark glasses on, but eyes closed in the shade and facing away from the sun too, not even, you know, with his back to the sun. So that's where we started from. And then we gradually built it up to being comfortable, looking slightly sideways rather than just having his back to the sun, and getting a little closer to the sun with lots of blinking. And so depending on your sensitivity, you've got to start where you are comfortable. Don't expect that in order for your eyes to get comfortable with sunlight, you have to look directly at the sunlight. That's, for most people, totally the opposite will happen. You'll strain like crazy and it'll do damage. So don't expect that you should be looking directly into sunlight. You go to a level that you're comfortable with, and then gradually, mostly with eyes closed, just work up to facing the sun with eyes closed. And Bates said just gently move your head side to side as your eyes are closed and you let the sun shine on it. And to help, imagine the sun is moving in the sky. So when you move your head to the left, it appears that the sun is moving over to your right. As you go back to the right, the sun will appear to move over to your left. So you're going to ignore your own motion and imagine it's the sun moving from side to side, which takes attention away from your eyes and how you're feeling and puts your attention on the movement of the sun, which is more relaxing usually.
That's a great tip. And I think what you said is really important, to start with baby steps. Do you have any tips? Because we as vision teachers, when we work with somebody, we see when they're straining, right? There's like their eyes are closed in the sun. It's like this hard. But for somebody that's by themselves practicing this, is there any, and I sometimes say, like, listen, just film yourself, like close your eyes, but just, see what you're doing. But do you have any other tips, like how people can get a sense of if they're straining and how they're straining without somebody telling them or checking on them?
Yeah. Well, it's as a teacher, when I'm looking at people, it's obvious when they strain, they have their eyes closed, but they're like this. Now that's obvious. When they're squinting their eyes or they're tilting their head down a bit because it's too bright, then they've gone to a level that's a little too much for them already. They need to be further away from the sun, looking sideways where they can relax, and then only slowly work up to coming closer to the sun.
But is there a way for them to gauge, like, themselves, if they don't have somebody watching them? Like, any tips that you have for somebody starting out and not really sure if they're straining or not? Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel people don't really feel their own strain, because it's your normal, it's your kind of normal state, and so you don't really notice that you're straining.
Well, it's how do your eyes feel? If you feel any kind of discomfort, there is a strain happening. So change away from the brightest light and find where do you feel that your eyes are more comfortable. No soreness, no squinting tensions, nothing in your face tensing up. Wherever it is away from the sun that you can totally be okay. And then go, okay, so from here, if I go look slightly closer to the sun, if the sun is kind of directly ahead of me here, this is fine. And here it's like, it's a little harder, right? So go back and just kind of approach it gently. And maybe if you go further away, you might be able to open your eyes with lots of blinking, but don't do it for too long, and just see, okay, what can I do? And maintain a soft, comfortable state of the whole face. And as soon as I feel something going on, then I'll close my eyes or move further away. Just become sensitive to how your eyes feel. Learn to listen to them.
I think that's a great tip, like noticing, I call this strains and gains, but noticing, like, where are you having discomfort? Where doesn't it feel great? And that, like we talked a little bit about calming, when I first started, I couldn't even sit for 1 minute. It felt like eternity. And I just closed my eyes for a few seconds and then slowly. So sometimes, we have that mindset, more is better, and no, sometimes less.
Not with sunning.
And you slowly begin to and find, sometimes I have outside clients, they couldn't even sit still. Like, it was the most, oh my God, this is so stressful. This is so stressful. I'm like, okay, let's go and do some movement for us, or do something else, because that is not going to help. Just closing the eyes and palming them when you are really anxious or stressed out about it.
No, go do some ball play or something.
Okay, let me see what else we have here. Janet is saying, I was wearing the pinhole glasses out walking in the sun.
I think the pinhole glasses kind of work a little bit like sunglasses in reducing the light so much that your pupils stay open bigger, but the pinholes then compensate for that. So I don't think pinholes should be outside in the sun as much, unless you're nearsighted and you're using it for the better clarity and avoiding regular glasses. In some cases you could say, it's a trade-off, but ideally go without.
Yeah, okay, that's a great advice. Carla is asking, is there really a way to fix our eyesight? Can being deficient in something cause bad eyesight? I guess the answer would be yes, but anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's it's kind of a broad question. Yes, vision can improve. I never thought it would either, but yes, it can.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have stayed in this profession for 22 years if it didn't. Right?
Same here. I've been doing it for a little over 10 years, actually over 13 years, and I would not do the same either.
No, you'd stop if it didn't work. Now, and you, Claudia, you teach a lot about nutrition. So, if whoever that question was from approaches Claudia about nutrition, she knows a lot about it. So
that's true. Let me see what else is. This was the question. Like, somebody was asking what exact techniques your boyfriend did doing the practice in Costa Rica, but I think we talked about less stress, being on vacation, being outside, the blinking versus staring, right? Is that was pretty much.
That's basically it. I didn't know much at that time. He was my
Yeah.
very first student. I knew very little on how to help him. I just had that one book for guidance and nothing else. And that book it's a really good book, but it has its mistakes in it too. So since then, a few years ago, I wrote a book called Optimal Eyesight, where I try to correct the mistakes that, yes, thank you, that corrects the mistake. It's not as big, it's not an encyclopedia, but it's
No,
big
it's
enough.
it's
It's
a
very
lot.
thorough, it covers the whole Bates method and includes a chapter on sunlight.
And here's
So,
also John Ott's book. I
John
have all
Ott's
kinds of
book.
books on sunlight.
Yeah.
A lot of questions are not really about sunlight. Let me look at the Zoom chat and questions if there's really anything. I don't see, well, and plus on Zoom, we can have the extra discussion at the end, but I don't see any questions right now specific about sunlight. But there's a few questions that I think would be great for you to answer anyway, since we have you on today. One is Bates wrote that for myopia, it's sometimes beneficial to strain when reading fine print. That doesn't sound right to me, but how to understand it?
Okay, Bates did talk about reading fine print, both for myopia and presbyopia.
By straining?
But not with strain. That's a misunderstanding. Don't do it with strain. Do it in the most relaxed way possible. If you can't read it and you're tempted to strain, go to the white background. Go to the white between the lines, the white between the words, the white inside, things like a letter O. Look for the white. Don't strain. Just let it come easy, because you're inviting your eyes to focus correctly on their own. If you do it with effort, you're interfering and you'll never get to clarity. So that's
great advice. And that's actually a question that came up. I'm curious. So the reading between the lines, I also teach that. Obviously, the white spaces relax your eyes. But then some people get confused about when you're actually reading, not just to relax your eyes, and when you use central fixation, you wouldn't look at the white spaces, but you would look more toward the letter. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, the thing is, you want to get out of the effort by looking at the white. And of course, the letters and the words are what we've been trained to read. So our temptation is to go straight back to the letters. But if you go to the white first, you'll relax better. And then with the more relaxed way of seeing, you'll catch the letters and they will be clearer. So you want to see them too and go in there and then go back in and out from the white lines to the black letters. Because yes, the black letters are clearer when you look directly at them. Central fixation rules, right?
Right.
So, but you relax better on the white often. So you start with the white, get the relaxed motion going, stop making the effort, and then let the letters bring your attention back to them.
That worked for me really well too. The thin white line and the halos, and the brighter the white looks, the blacker the black looks, and it just sharpens up that way. I know that's not our topic today, but I'm just looking. Let's see.
I saw one question come by about the audiobook. My book is an audiobook too, so if you'd rather listen than read. I don't know that Tom Quackenbush's is an audiobook. I've never seen that. But Optimal Eyesight is available as audio.
I don't know either. It's called We Learn to See. I have it also somewhere. I noticed that
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I noticed that if I sun just a few minutes, I see better indoors when on the computer, but feel stress the more I'm on it. So Serena is saying she does notice the vision is better after the sunlight, but then the computer is stressful for her.
Yes.
It
is for many people. There's various reasons for being stressful at the computer. You might be losing your peripheral vision. You might be staring. There's a variety of reasons why the computer is stressful. Now, if it improves by going outside, that means your pupils were smaller because you were in the bright outdoor light. You come back indoors, that smaller pupil stays small for a little while and then starts to adjust for indoor lower light and becomes bigger, which then might create a little blurriness for you, and then you begin to strain again, and then it's a cascade of problems that come from the strain. So avoid the strain. And sorry.
No, it's interesting because I used to think that the pupils are like that it's an effort to make them small, but they actually relax when they're small, and it's an effort to open them. So that was something. I have a question that I get a lot too, and I'm curious. I mean, I have my answer, but I want to hear from you too. So a lot of times, and this was happening to me when I was living in Germany, right? It's super cold outside, or you walk in a building and it's high up, and so sunning behind windows.
Yep.
Right. And I usually say that the new windows all have these UV blocks in place and to kind of better insulation. But any thoughts on the whole idea of palming? Why do I say palming? Sunning behind the window versus going outside.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, Dr. Bates said it was fine to sun behind a window. And I think this is advice from 100 years ago, and people spent more time outdoors in general. So a little bit of sunning from behind a window on a cold day didn't matter so much, right? But now that we know that UVB doesn't come through windows and UVB is so important for vitamin D, my preference is that you do sunning outside where you get the full spectrum, even the trace radiation that definitely doesn't come through windows. And the overall level of light is that much higher outside. Indoors, it's always relatively low light levels. So if possible, do your sunning outdoors. If you don't have that and the sun does come through a window, it's a good replacement every once in a while, but not all the time.
Yeah, that's I think that's kind of a good topic to end on. And plus windows 100 years ago, I mean, I lived in a really old house. It was single pane glass. Now it's like here in California where you and I live, we have all these environmental regulations and the UV block and all these, and usually they're double pane. And so the glass 100 years ago was probably also still letting a lot more light through than the new glass does. So
yeah,
anything you
another
want
solution. Yeah, another solution is it's a sun lamp like this. This here, I could quickly switch it on. It's very bright, but
Oh yeah.
right?
What is that?
This is a sun lamp that comes on for 15 minutes and is a full spectrum lamp. And so you get a 15-minute sunning session out of it. And it also has infrared in it. And I really like that. So
can you put the link in the chat or the brand? Because I have an infrared lamp that I use, because infrared light rays, obviously we know, helps rejuvenate the mitochondria, but I love that it has the sunlight also, the spectrum in it.
So it's on my website, and if you go to my website, visionsofjoy.org, in the section on vision aids, the sun lamps are there. So you click on vision aids in the left column, and then at the top you'll see a list of the sections there, and you go for the sun lamps, and it's in there.
So thank you so much. That was awesome. Anything, your website is, and it's in the YouTube notes, visionsofjoy.org. You can spend weeks on that website because there's so much information on there. Anything else that you want to share, or final thoughts, or any resources that you recommend other than the ones that we already put in the description?
There was a question came by what podcast I do. It's the Better Eyesight podcast with Nathan Oxenfeld. So bettereyesightpodcast.com. I don't think that's in the links.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a great podcast.
That's once a month, comes out the first of each month, reading the magazine from 100 years ago. We'll be doing that until 2030.
I love it. So it's every I've been on the show. You kind of rotate through different teachers reading the Better Eyesight magazines 100 years ago. So the upcoming one would be November 1922, and then there's also a discussion with the teachers reading it about what how the supplies nowadays. So any observations. So it's a great podcast. And Better Eyesight. What is the link? Better Eyesight magazine. No, Better Eyesight.
bettereyesightpodcast.com.
Podcast.com. That's a really great one. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was super interesting. I loved some of the new research that I hadn't heard about. And there's so many. So basically the fear of sunlight is misguided, I guess, to answer that question.
That's the conclusion, yes.
That's the conclusion. And of course, be careful, that there is a level of where you burn. We all know that, and we don't want anybody to burn.
Don't burn. You really don't want to burn. That's the damaging part. So if you feel you're out there and your skin's getting warm, then yes, that's the time to cover up or get into the shade. Avoid the burn, but don't avoid the sun, both for your eyes and overall health.
Well, thank you so much. That was awesome, Esther. Thank you so much for being here with us. And the next week, we're going to have Peter Grunwald on from New Zealand, also a vision teacher. So subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out Esther's resources. I don't know, do you have a YouTube channel? I don't even know.
I do, yes.
Yeah,
Visions
okay.
of Joy. Yeah.
Visions of Joy. So subscribe to Esther's channel and find her on all the links and resources we put in there. And thank you for being on the show. And we're going to now continue our Zoom conversation with the Clear Vision Club members of the YouTube. So goodbye, YouTube. We see you next week. Bye.